episode of This Week in Cleantech, a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, May 3rd, 2024. I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Engel. Maxine Joselow from the Washington Post will be joining us shortly, but for now I'm joined by my good friend and industry colleague, Mike Casey of TigerCom. How are you, Mike?
I'm good, friend. Am I going to see you in Minneapolis next week?
No.
Okay, fine. Be that way.
Any other questions? No, I'll be in. I just like hanging you out to dry. That's my favorite part of the week. I look forward to this. What am I going to do with Mike Casey like he's a piñata, and I just have this metal bat? No, I'll be at IEEE in Anaheim. So lots of utility stuff. You'll be at Clean Power, it sounds like.
I will.
Cool. Well, we will have to debrief on both when we get back.
All right, that sounds good. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to make any jokes about your Instagram feed, but I will say we have 2 listeners who've agreed to be on our fall committee to pick the Cleantecher of the Year. So big thanks to Brian Willis and John Christians. We need 2 to 3 more listeners. Aaron Petrie, you're our first listener. How about it? I want to hear from you.
All right, and we want to thank all of our listeners for weighing in on the stories of the week and nominating Cleantechers of the week. You can do that at rew@clarionevents.com, and we have a link in the episode description as well. Okay, Mike, get after it.
Okay, my friend, first story, Benoit Morin and Andrew Malika of the Wall Street Journal has a story entitled, "In America's Biggest Oil Field, the Ground is Swelling and Buckling." So we're going to explain why this is a clean tech trend story. But you first, John.
An analysis by the journal found that land under the Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico has sunk as much as 11 inches since just 2015 as a result of drilling. In other areas where wastewater from drilling is pumped into underground wells, the land has risen by as much as 5 inches. So for context, we're producing nearly 6 million barrels of oil per day in the Permian. That's more than triple what we produced a decade ago, and that extraction requires massive amounts of water that becomes unusable, and so it's pumped back underground. So last year, companies injected 3.4 billion barrels of wastewater into disposal wells in the Permian. The increased pressure from injecting all that wastewater is not only causing the ground to rise, it's making it harder to drill. And when the water's pumped deep underground, it can cause earthquakes, which have increased more than tenfold in the area since 2017. Nothing to see here, right, Mike?
Well said. All right, I'm going to say something I've said in the past on LinkedIn. Fossil fuels are a technology that fail catastrophically. From oil spills to coal mine cave-ins to fracking contamination of water tables, here's the inconvenient truth. Renewables don't do this. Just this morning, one of our friends, Alex Peterson, showed me footage of a oil tanker turned over on a highway in his hometown on fire, right? So the haters have Facebook pages full of propaganda against renewables, but there's no getting around the massive downsides of using fossil fuels. So here's the opportunity for clean tech. We need to be a player in the conversation about immediate externalities, not just the long-term climatology. If we don't point out the facts and the cost that incumbents are imposing on society, they will be free to make stuff up about us all by themselves. John, story number 2.
Yeah, our second story is by Steve Levine from The Information, titled "Musk Plans More Layoffs as 2 Senior Tesla Executives Depart." Mike, I'm serving this to you on a platter, but let's please stick to the facts. This is not about your feelings about the owner of Twitter.
All right, I am going to avoid making fun of your favorite corporate bully, John.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. You take these pot shots at me that are uncalled for. So you go on your own tirade and don't bring me into it. How about that?
Fine, be that way. You're very salty today.
I am. I
saying,
even have a little sunburn. I was mowing the lawn earlier, so maybe I'm a little crabby.
Serves you right. All right, Elon Musk. You might have heard of him. Just noting that his other company's net income was down 55% in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period in 2023. And in April, they announced plans to lay off more than 10% of the workers. So, setting all aside the jokes that I and others make at Mr. Musk's expense, the company is a big deal, and it is easily the most high-profile clean tech company in the world. He's transformed the auto industry, so what happens to Tesla does have lots of impact. I'm not sure all of them are foreseeable, but I think that Confusingly, those layoffs included nearly the entire 500-member charging team. So, man, John, I don't know what to make of this other than I think it's a big deal.
Well, yeah, and you alluded to it too, that a lot of people will point to Elon Musk as being that single person that has done more for climate than maybe anybody else because of the rise of Tesla and battery storage, solar, all the different kind of things. And you can dispute that. But the head scratcher here is that Tesla really had won the race, as so many, like Alexa St. John last week, have reported in this charging war. They got the rest of the automakers to say, we'll throw up the white flag and we'll follow your lead. We'll use your charger. We'll get it, follow your standards. But so what comes next? So without a team leading the supercharger segment, no one's developing, no one's moving forward permits, no one's going for land lease deals, no one's doing any of that hard work. And that is the network that's the backbone of this movement right now. And if the one thing that's the problem in making the switch for so many is range anxiety, if you take away the most reliable charging network and really the best performing, I think that could be troublesome. So we'll see what Elon says about it. I don't know that he's made any comments since that information report, but confused and really want to know what the direction is here. All right, Mike, what's next?
I know what happened, John.
Okay.
Elon's friend Vladimir Putin called him up and asked him to do that.
All right, go to the next story. You see, you don't work for this website and for this podcast. You say stuff like that. That is not accurate. We don't have proof of that, and we will not be sued for that. So I may even have to cut this. I may have to cut you, and maybe just This Week in Cleantech with John Engel next week. I'll use your producer,
Oh boy, salty.
This is where it all comes to an end. All good things come to an end. You know that last tour of a really good band when you didn't know it was coming to an end yet? That was last week.
We're not going to have any time for our guest if you keep at it, John Engel. All right, David Baker of Bloomberg wrote a story titled "Sodium Batteries from Michigan Challenge: Lithium's Grip on the Energy Transition." This is pretty cool, I got to say, John.
Yeah, so Natron Energy, a California-based energy storage company, opened its first full-scale sodium-ion battery plant in Holland, Michigan on Monday. Their batteries are similar to lithium-ion, used in most EVs, phones, and computers, but there are some key differences. So sodium-ion batteries discharge faster. They don't need lithium or cobalt, which can be expensive and environmentally damaging to source. And according to Natron, there's no fire risk. Downside: energy density, which listeners were probably aware of, which is critical in order for electric vehicles to have long range and, to fit in a car, but less important for their target application, which is backup power to support large electricity users like data centers. There are a few players in this space, Mike, but what did you think?
So I had a client CEO several years ago, Chris Brown. He was at Vestas. He told me storage is in what he said was a state of beautiful chaos. I love that saying, and I think here you go with another proof point with this exciting development. So, integrating these batteries to the grid could accelerate the deployment of clean energy by charging when there's lots of wind and solar available and discharging at times of peak demand. And a few weeks ago, we discussed how data centers are going to play this big role driving electricity use across the country, potentially putting a huge strain on the grid. So deploying wind and solar and batteries next to data centers could do a lot to relieve that strain. John, what's our fourth story?
Yeah, Ben Gieman at Axios has a story titled "Biden Completes Permitting Rule." Quick and to the point, Axios style. Mike, what'd you think?
Yeah, Biden administration on Tuesday released a finalized version of an environmental reform to the environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA. The new rules would expand what qualifies for categorical exclusion, say that 10 times fast, which is essentially a fast track for certain types of low-impact projects in specific areas. They would add deadlines and page limits to environmental reviews and increase emphasis on environmental justice by directing agencies to consider local impacts and engage local communities. John?
Yeah, so a little background. NEPA was established to evaluate the environmental impact of federal agency projects, including fossil fuel development, but in recent years, it's disproportionately been applied to renewables. That could really help the backlog and the slowdown in environmental reviews that this industry has been calling for a while. All right, our last story, our fifth story, and our guest this week. Mike, you want to throw it over?
Our last story is written by Maxine Joselow from the Washington Post. New rules will slash air, water, and climate pollution from U.S. power plants. Delighted to have Maxine on, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
top takeaway for people who haven't yet read your piece, which we absolutely want them to do.
Definitely want them to read, but if they haven't had a chance to read, I think my top takeaway from writing the piece is that the EPA is really cracking down on all types of pollution from power plants, mainly coal plants in this country, not just greenhouse gases, but air pollution, water pollution, anything that comes from the smokestacks or is discharged into waterways.
So, Maxine, what comes next is the biggest question here. And everyone knows, marching towards an election, these kinds of orders will not likely survive a change in administration and are likely to be sued beyond belief. So what should we make of the value here? Because we know that the group of Republican attorney generals usually like to issue one pretty firm announcement of their position here.
Well, I think you're right. Legal and political challenges are certain. I would not be surprised if any day now we see a lawsuit from a group of Republican attorneys general. West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey infamously sued over the Obama administration's power plant rule and got the Supreme Court to say that they had gone too far. And so Biden EPA officials were, really careful crafting this rule with the hopes that it would survive in court. But I'm not a lawyer, I just interview them all the time, so I don't know what will happen. But even if it survives in court, then if you had Trump win the election, I don't think his EPA would take the same approach and would likely begin the process of undoing this rule, although that would take time.
Maxine, in the course of your reporting, what are your observations of how Director Regan is doing running the EPA? I don't get to ask this question very much of folks who cover these agencies, and I think you've got a really good perch to have some long running observations.
I think overall, the environmentalists I've talked to are really pleased with everything that Administrator Regan has been able to accomplish. I think he's working within some important constraints to note. Staffing levels at the EPA plummeted during the Trump administration. There was what a lot of people called a brain drain, where a lot of career scientists were tired of being muzzled or told not to mention the words climate change, and they just left the agency and found work in the private sector. So within those constraints, I think he's been able to do a lot. He's focused on staffing up, but he's also focused on hiring some really smart people and crafting a lot of rules that'll be legally durable, and hopefully will outlast his time.
Maxine, last one here. Is this ruling, if it should hold up, survives the legal challenges or doesn't get halted at the outset, and President Biden stays in office for a second term, coal has to die, finally, after this, right? But I can't see any economic scenario where the retrofitting of coal assets with carbon capture up to, I think, 90% or something. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was enough to make me say, well, they can't survive that, no matter what, innovation we find.
Yeah, I think that's a sentiment I've heard from a lot of people, that the hidden goal here seems to be to force the retirement of coal plants because it's not going to make economic sense for them to retrofit those coal plants with carbon capture. It's going to be cheaper just to shut down than to comply. But I think, it remains to be seen what will happen. And I think if there were to be a second Biden term, the big regulatory focus would be actually natural gas, because this rule doesn't apply to existing gas plants, just future gas plants. So that's also something I'm keeping an eye on.
Good point.
John, we're just about out of time. We need to go to our Cleantecher of the Week.
Yeah, this week's Cleantecher of the Week is Justina Whipkey, the mill supervisor at JM Steel plant outside Pittsburgh that just tripled capacity to supply trackers to solar projects throughout the region. At an event to celebrate the expansion, she told a local NBC station, "We're American-based. We're here to provide for the country, and these jobs are not going anywhere for a long time, so there's a lot of pride here."
It's awesome. Well, I want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, as well as Alex Peterson and Phoebe Lees this week, who filled in for the vacationing Claire Quirin and got our stories gathered.
Yes, and big thanks to Maxine Joselow for joining us on this episode of This Week in Cleantech. Please subscribe, give us feedback, and share your story recommendations. You can read all of the articles we mentioned this week by clicking the links in the episode description. All right, Mike, we'll see you next time. If there is a next time, I don't know, because you were really towing the line this week, so we'll see. Check back in next Friday.
I was edging up to the line.
right.
I wasn't towing the line. All right, take care.